Hackers, crackers and server smackers. We have previously talked about other well-known hackers, black hats or whatever title you would like to give them, with the likes of Gary McKinnon, the UFO hacker, or Dr. Chaos. But this mad lad has very often been crowned the king of hacking, or at least crowned as one of the most famous hackers in the whole world, with people both fearing and loving him. But love him or hate him, he's had a massive influence on the cybersecurity industry as well as the hacking community itself through his adventures as a master of trickery, a manipulator of people, and their systems. The Ghost in the Wires. That's a reference. Kevin Mitnick, the world's most wanted hacker. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get started, this video is brought to you by Raycon. With Raycon earbuds, you can greatly enhance your listening experience with amazing quality for half the price of other premium audio brands. The new everyday earbuds are constantly improving with a rubber look and feel that is both functional yet aesthetically pleasing. Raycons have been specifically modified through many design iterations to seamlessly fit the curvature of your ears, as well as including varying optimized gel tips for a comfortable yet solid fit. Previous customers have given over 50,000 5-star reviews online. I really enjoy my Raycons because of the great sound quality and bass, and also because they never fall out during my workout or any other activity. And Raycons are also more adaptable than ever, with a built-in mic that allows you to take calls at the push of a button, and it also includes easy-to-use media control so you don't have to take your phone out constantly. They are also compatible with both Siri and Alexa, and include 3 default audio profiles for you to customize your listening experience. Enjoy your music and videos with high-quality bass and passive noise isolation for true immersion. Raycons are also resistant to sweat and water, so they can survive being accidentally put through the washing machine or being dropped in a puddle. Raycons offer up to 8 hours of playtime and 32 hours of battery life. So if you want to get some top tier earbuds while also supporting my channel, then click my link in the description box down below or go to buyraycon.com/Dankula to get an exclusive deal of up to 15% off your order. Kevin Mitnick was born on the 6th of August 1963 in sunny California, but he didn't have the best start in life. Growing up as an only child, Kevin's father split with his mother Shelley while Kevin was only 3 years old, leaving him with no father figure at the time. Thankfully, he did see him on occasion, but since his father lived out of state while Kevin grew up in San Fernando Valley, this left him with only a few people to look up to in life. His father apparently did care about Kevin, so it wasn't a completely broken relationship, although his father wouldn't be more involved in his life until he was 13 years old, when his father moved back to Los Angeles. As for his mother, she would support Kevin and the family by taking up various waitress jobs in delis around Ventura Boulevard, which is located in San Fernando Valley. Although Kevin would have several more disruptions to his childhood, for one, he spent many years in solitude due to him and his mother moving around so often, meaning he didn't have enough time to make friends during his early years. Although this wouldn't be the only time that Kevin would spend in solitude, but we can get into that later. Showing great intuition as a child, Kevin did somewhat well in school, with his teachers informing his mother that he was in the top 1 percentile in mathematics and spelling, years ahead of the other kids in his class. But he wasn't perfect in class, and he was very often hyperactive, not being able to cope with such a restricted and academic environment. So everything seemed somewhat normal for his childhood, although it wouldn't be as cut and clear. Kevin's mother had 3 different husbands and various boyfriends during Kevin's time growing up, and out of those partners, one abused Kevin, and another, who actually worked in law enforcement, molested him. Besides the rough start in life, what actually got Kevin into hacking? Well, let's say it was a little thing called magic. No, seriously, literally, magic. Apparently, when Kevin was in his youth, a neighbour girl that he had a crush on would invite him around to her house, and she would dance for him while naked. But Kevin did not have time for any of that thought behaviour. He was much more interested in the girl's father. Not like that. Not like that. The girl's father was an amateur magician, and he would show Kevin magic tricks. And these tricks fascinated Kevin, not for the usual reasons that most of us enjoy magic tricks. Kevin was a lot more interested in the art of trickery and deception. So it wasn't just the act itself, it was the whole spectacle of openly deceiving large groups of people and them loving it. That set an unconscious love for deception deep within Kevin. Luckily for Kevin, the nearest magic store wasn't too far from him. It was just a mere bike ride away. So you can see the domino effect starting. Kevin would regularly go there and use it as his spare time hangout. This would be his doorway into hacking, or at least the first steps in setting Kevin's mindset on deception, as his technological skills wouldn't fully develop until he was in high school. But for now, he could train another important skill, one that is used to great effect in both magic and hacking: social engineering. Although Kevin would very often ride his bike to the magic store, he would sometimes use the bus, which would start the next steps in his hacking story. This is where Kevin would meet Bob. Bob, the bus driver. The story goes that Kevin went on the bus, as usual, and he was wearing a t-shirt that said, "CBers do it on the air." CB meaning central band radio, sometimes called ham radio. And there were a lot of home hobbyists who would buy and set up their own radio equipment to broadcast their own stations or to talk to fellow radio enthusiasts all over the country. It's why Radio Shack started. And the hobby reached its peak in Kevin's youth during the 80s, which is why it's even seen in Stranger Things. And Bob noticed Kevin's shirt, so he told Kevin that he found a Motorola handheld that was apparently a police radio. Kevin, of course, at a young age, thought that he might be able to use this device to listen into police frequencies, but this was just Bob pulling his leg. Although it turned out that Bob was an avid ham radio hobbyist, and his enthusiasm for the subject was passed on to Kevin. Bob would introduce Kevin to the early stages of ham radios, even showing him how to make free phone calls by utilising an auto patch. This would lead Kevin into doing night classes and eventually earning a ham radio licence, which at the time was a pretty big deal for someone as young as Kevin. This would lead Kevin to not just being interested in the hobby at just a surface level, but make him take a deep interest into the inner workings of the phone systems and how these companies actually operated. This would even affect his attendance at high school, because he would very often skip classes to go to the local ham radio store to read about the stuff and learn even more. You can slowly see over Kevin's childhood the building blocks of a hacker putting themselves into place. The high intellect, the interest in magic and deception, until finally falling in love with communications technology. But we've yet to see these things being combined together, although the first stage of Kevin's hacking escapades would truly start with his first use of social engineering. Remember how Kevin would ride the bus? Well, he started going around California more, and of course at the time, buses seemed like the best option. As Kevin used the buses more and more, he soon figured out the system. In those days, they would utilise a punch type system, where each transfer ticket would have whatever punch correlating to the type of ticket and the area. So Kevin just thought to himself, why don't I just punch my own tickets? And so he did. But it wasn't that easy. He first had to learn where he could get the specific punch that the drivers used, as well as a bunch of blank transfers. So, Kevin reckoned that he could probably find a bunch of blank transfers in the trash containers outside of the bus station. And as for the punch, Kevin would use a little bit of social engineering to go in and just ask where he might find this specific type of punch by pretending he needed it for a school project. And the first stage of the plan worked. The bus driver obviously thought that this fresh-faced young boy couldn't possibly be up to no good, and he told Kevin the specific store that he could buy this punch from. So Kevin went to the store and got the punch. Phase 1 complete. But now he needed the blank transfers, so he would have to go on another little adventure to find those. So he went to a large garbage container just outside of the bus station. He climbed up into it, and as he suspected, jackpot. The bin was absolutely filled with these blank transfers that bus drivers had just dumped in there at the end of their shift. So now Kevin had everything he needed to forge his own tickets. But of course, Kevin had to test the forged tickets to make sure that they actually worked. And they did. Kevin was able to travel all over California using buses for free. Because Kevin had also managed to memorise the correct ways to punch the tickets by watching the bus drivers and seeing how they would do it. And all of this was achieved by a certain art given the technical term of dumpster diving, which wouldn't be the last time that Kevin would do something like that, to gain some information or find some other hidden gems that he would exploit later in life. So would Kevin leave California and go on big adventures elsewhere using this exploit in the bus system? No, he just used it to travel around locally. But during his travels, he made a friend by the name of Richard Williams. And funnily enough, Richard was basically doing the same thing as Kevin. He was riding the bus for free. But the big difference is he was doing it legally, because it turns out that Richard's dad was a bus driver. So Richard just got to ride the bus for free. Richard and Kevin would go on many adventures together to Jack in the Box. Kevin, to put it lightly, described Richard as obese. So during their trips, it was essential that they would stop off and get the infamous super taco up to 6 times a day. These habits would soon leach on to Kevin, leading to him getting a little bit chubby. This eventually wouldn't go unnoticed, as Kevin tells the story like this. It wasn't long before a pigtailed blonde girl on the school bus told me, "You're kinda cute, but you're fat. You ought to lose some weight." Did I take her sharp but unquestionably constructive advice to heart? Nope. And that's good, Kevin. We should never care what women think. But you might be thinking, what about the forged tickets? Did he ever get caught or get in trouble? Well, neither. The maniac, for some reason, even told his mum and dad what he was doing. And they both just said that it was clever and it showed initiative. Kevin even told the fucking bus drivers, who just laughed at the situation because of how this young man had actually managed to figure out and con the entire system. Did they report him? No, they didn't. Instead, they just gave him a bunch of attaboys. This also wouldn't be the last time when Kevin would be highly praised for his hacking or social engineering techniques. Besides Kevin's first act of social engineering, he lived a pretty normal childhood. And being Jewish, he had to have a bar mitzvah. Although he even commented that himself and many other Jewish families aren't very religious at all, but they'll still commonly practice certain traditions. Kevin just really wasn't that interested in religion. Or even school for that matter, because he was kicked out of a Hebrew school for apparently goofing off and always taking the piss out of the teachers. But the one thing that Kevin did practice other than learning to read the Torah was social engineering, but subconsciously. Kevin would mimic the rabbi to his parents, which of course they probably just found very funny. But in reality, this was another way of increasing his social engineering skills, just like the speech perk in Elder Scrolls games. Now, I won't do a stereotypical impersonation of a rabbi because I don't want to go to prison again, but hear me out. Being able to mimic the way that other people act, speak, or present themselves allows for the social engineer to manipulate them into a sense of comfort, of familiarity. Of course, in this case, this is just a kid having fun, but it can take a certain knack to act or present yourself differently in a hacking scenario, either to fish for information or manipulate your way into restricted areas. Because the tried and true classic method of just walking into somewhere with a high-vis vest and a clipboard can only get you so far. If you get confronted, you need to know how to act the part. Now, although he got the boot from his previous school, he would soon move into James Monroe High School in LA. Kevin would have another two major influential establishments that would further develop his skills as a hacker. First, high school, and secondly, a local survival bookstore. Starting off with the bookstore, Kevin was an avid reader, along with having idols such as Houdini, which of course ties in with his interest in magic, and Jim Rockford, a fictional private detective. This would send Kevin deep into learning more about what he would call underground knowledge. You know, the type of knowledge that your government generally doesn't want you to know. So, at the age of just 13, Kevin would regularly visit this bookstore, and he would read a plethora of books. And these books wouldn't consist of your typical fantasy adventures. Oh, no. These books would be the books that Kevin needed to sculpt the skills he required to pursue his own adventures in real life. Two books in particular included The Paper Trip by Barry Reed, which taught Kevin several details on how to create a new identity for himself by using the birth certificates of people that had passed away. This, of course, became very useful to Kevin later in life, but we'll get into that later. And the other book that he learned an awful lot of knowledge from was called The Big Brother Game by Scott French. This was the key book in which Kevin learned a variety of things, like how to get a hold of information such as driving and property records, how to get banking information, and even how to get information from police departments. This book Kevin has described as his Bible. In this den of underground knowledge, Kevin wouldn't just learn about the art of forgery or how particular administrative bypasses can be accomplished. He would also learn more physical skills, like lockpicking. They would actually sell lockpicking sets, and of course, Kevin wanted to buy one. And you may think, come on now, they aren't going to sell a 13-year-old boy a lockpicking set. Yeah, well, they did. So Kevin would, again, just like his books, practice and understand the meaning behind the skills he was eager to obtain and master. So, as a teenager, he would regularly go down to the tenant storage containers in his apartment building and practice picking the locks. Sometimes even completely removing the locks and then swapping them around on the containers, which Kevin found very, very funny. His neighbours, however, did not find it very funny. But they had no idea who was doing it. Besides the part-time tomfoolery, at high school, Kevin would regularly take his handheld ham radio and use it during lunches and recess. Now, at the time, most teachers would probably describe Kevin as the kid that would do unexpected things, probably due to his quiet and unpronounced demeanour. Kevin summed it up himself rather well when he said, and I quote, When the other kids were fixing televisions in TV repair shop, I was following in Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak's footsteps, and building a blue box that would allow me to manipulate the phone network and even make free phone calls. Simply put, Kevin had all the right beginnings to make him one of the best and most renowned hackers in the world. And for those who don't know what a blue box is, I won't go into great detail, but it was basically a device that early hackers, more commonly known back then as phone phreakers, would use to manipulate the phone systems around the world, but most commonly in the US. They would be popularised by well-known early hackers such as Steve Wozniak of Apple and John Draper, also known as Captain Crunch, who could possibly be a mad lad himself. But Kevin's start in phone phreaking itself wouldn't have even happened without the introductory courses given to him by a fellow student by the name of Stephen Shalita. Stephen knew the basics of how to phone phreak and Kevin didn't. But unlike Kevin, he didn't understand things on such a complex level. And what do I mean by that? Well, Stephen might have introduced this method of hacking using surface level knowledge, but once Kevin was hooked, he very quickly surpassed Stephen in skill and knowledge on the matter. Once Kevin had his feelers out and got on some even footing, he soon learned that there was what you could possibly call a social network used by other fellow phone phreakers. Via the phone, of course. Kevin befriended a lot of them. He made connections with them, and they would even all attend get-togethers together for other people of the same hobby. But sadly, some of the phone phreaks were, as Kevin put it himself, actual freaks, as in they were socially inept and generally uncool. But that's to be expected, I guess. So you're probably thinking, come on Dank, when did the computers get involved? And we'll get into that, you fucking zoomers. But Kevin initially didn't even enroll in the computer course offered at his school, since he didn't have the relevant maths or science courses to qualify. But once Kevin was introduced to the computing teacher and he saw how much Kevin had already learned on his own, along with how keen he was, he let Kevin join the class. Kevin was now able to again learn a new skill and adapt to a new set of tools for him to understand. The computer. He started learning Fortran and BASIC to older forms of programming languages, for those of you that aren't too familiar with coding, and only a few weeks into the class, he had actually written a script to steal passwords which would then be stored in a secret file. Nothing too complex, but at the time, that was a pretty amazing feat for a teenager who had only been doing this for a couple of weeks. When he was asked why he did it, all he said was, "My friends and I thought it would be cool to get everyone's password." Well, alright then, you know, at least it's not a sinister reason. He just thought it would be cool and he was just doing it because he could. And this is one thing that I've come to learn about Kevin. It's that throughout all his life, there's usually not a complicated reason to why he does things. It usually all just boils down to, because I wanted to see if I could. But sadly, this time, Kevin would get caught. All because of a snitch. Eventually, one of the lab monitors had snitched on him to the system administrator, and the next thing you know, 3 police officers came to the school and held Kevin until his mother could come and get him. However, the police soon released Kevin without any charges. Now, why is that? Because there were no charges that they could give him. Cybercrime and hacking laws didn't exist yet. So, since no laws existed yet to charge him under, they just let him go. But he was still banned from the computer labs and he was ordered to stay off campus. Between his antics at high school, Kevin would very often perform various prank calls while he was phone phreaking. Although to do these prank calls, a lot of which would be international calls, it would have cost Kevin's mother hundreds of dollars. So he avoided the cost by using a local ham radio auto patch. Now, this would allow Kevin to make free phone calls whenever he wanted. However, a control operator of one of the local telephone companies noticed the strange amount of digits that Kevin would key into the line when he made a call, which was an indication that he was using an auto patch. So, the control operator eventually phoned Kevin's mother to complain about it. But while this phone call was happening, another phone phreak was listening in on the line, because that was another thing that phone phreaks could do. They could listen in on other people's private phone calls. And he was intrigued by what Kevin was doing. And this is when Kevin eventually met Louis DePayne, also known by his hacker name, Rosco. This would be the start of a hacking duo for life, with Rosco and Kevin, who was known at the time by his phone phreak handle Condor, apparently chosen after a movie he liked called 3 Days of the Condor. Unbeknownst to Kevin, this would be the tipping point in his soon-to-be hacking career, as up to this point, he had been building up his skills and knowledge of both communications technologies like ham radios and the phone networks, as well as computers, and of course, the key to his future success, social engineering. With all of these components slowly being pieced together, all Kevin needed now was more motivation to spark the flame of his interest in the game. And what do I mean by that? Well, like a runner's high or a kleptomaniac walking out of Tesco with a can of tuna up their chufter, Kevin got a thrill from the entire game of hacking. The reconnaissance, the problem solving, and of course, capturing the sacred fruit of the tech world. But what would that fruit be? Well, we will find out soon enough, but none of this would have happened without a few connections and people to network with. And thankfully, Rosco was just the man that Kevin needed, and they both very quickly became friends. So now, Kevin and Louis would become partners in crime, or partners in cybercrime. You could argue that half of the stuff that they did together was mostly practical jokes or attempts at trying to be the top dogs of the hacking world. For example, one hack that Kevin loves talking about, which he and Louis would do together regularly, was the McDonald's hack. Now, remember, these two were more than competent at manipulating different forms of telecommunication systems. So basically, the hack goes like this. They found out how to modify a portable 2-meter radio. So, you know how at drive-thrus at McDonald's where you have the little speaker where you place your order? You can already see where this is going, can't you? Well, they managed to figure out how to manipulate the speaker and tune their frequency to the same frequency used by the McDonald's drive-thru radios, so that the customers would hear them instead. So they would drive to McDonald's and park in the car park or in a nearby area just close enough so they could see who was driving up to the drive-thru radio. Kevin and Louis would even bring along their friends because of just how hilarious this was. And to give a few examples of some of the things that Kevin would do, sometimes he would say things like, "Well done, you're the 100th customer, your meal is free," where the customer would then, of course, make a giant order since it was free. And then they would be very upset once they got to the window and realised it was not free and they had to pay for all of it. Or if Kevin could tell the person was a little bit on the more rotund side of the spectrum, he would say, "Due to the weight of the occupant in this vehicle, I'd recommend you order the McSalad." Or sometimes he and his friends would just put on a really thick Indian accent that was barely understandable to the customers. Another thing that they did at the McDonald's drive-thru, I'm sure that all of you have tried to order a milkshake or an ice cream and the machine is always perpetually fucking broken. Well, Kevin would tell them that the machines were broken, but then he would say, "Hey, how about we give you a complimentary juice instead? Would you like apple juice?" And the customer would always accept. And then Kevin would start playing a recording of someone pissing. Sometimes cops would show up to the drive-thru so that they could get themselves something to eat. Now, usually pranksters would do the smart thing and wait until the cops leave before they continue with the prank. But not Kevin. He would either say, "I'm sorry, we don't serve cops here, you'll have to go to Jack in the Box," or he would start shouting, hide the cocaine," down the radio. After too many angry and perplexed customers, the manager figured out that someone was messing with the radio. So he ran outside to take a look. The manager then proceeded to look into the speaker itself to see if anyone had tampered with it. So of course, Kevin saw a golden opportunity and screamed down the radio, "What the fuck are you looking at?" Which made the manager shit himself and jump back about 10 feet. At the time of these McDonald's hacks, Kevin was only around 16 or 17 years old. So, as we mentioned earlier, Kevin needed connections to both other hackers and, of course, new networks to hack. Through Lewis, he met a few other phone freaks such as Susan Headley, aka Susan Thunder, a well-known female hacker, because yes, it turns out they do exist. And word has it that her hacker name reflected not her skills, but her thighs. That's probably not true, but they would end up going on to form a small group of hackers known as the Rosco gang. To get an in within the hacking sphere, you had to prove yourself to the other hackers and get their approval. This is a way to weed out the script kiddies and people that really don't even understand the technology and mechanisms behind what they were supposed to be exploiting. And of course, they would all play a game of who's got the biggest cyber knob by seeing who could pull off the most impressive feat. So, for example, if you breach the system of a small office or your own school, that's not that big of a deal. But breach a huge software company's network and potentially gain some secret files or the holy grail, source code. Now that was impressive. And that was the type of stuff that got you noticed. So, due to Kevin's age and being a newcomer to the hacking world, he would have to prove himself to the other hackers to get in with them. Though, Kevin did have another issue at this time. You see, between his other various hacks, he would see some benefits and drawbacks to the phone phreaking. Slowly but surely, the telephone companies would catch on to the various methods that the phone phreaks were using to communicate with each other. Or they would just have the suspicion that various users were up to something, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it. And Kevin wasn't excluded from this. One example that Kevin gives was during a phone call with another fellow phreaker friend by the name of Steve Rhodes. They were calling between a diverted telephone line. And while they were chatting, all of a sudden, they heard someone else on the line say, "We are monitoring." Immediately, they both shit themselves and hung up. Who the fuck was that? The cops? Another phone phreaker? Well, I've already spoiled it, but it turns out that the telephone company had been listening in to their conversation. So they called each other again, but this time on a direct connection, laughing at the attempts of the phone engineers trying to scare them, saying how stupid these phone engineers were. Until, again, they heard the exact same voice on the line say, "We are still monitoring." Although these were very talented phone phreakers, they both get caught with their pants down, which eventually led to some backlash at home with Kevin's mother. Because not long after this, Kevin's mother received a letter from the telephone company along with a personal visit from the telephone company's head of security, warning her that if Kevin didn't stop his shenanigans, they would terminate their service for abusing their system. Now, I can't say that they were in the wrong, they were totally within their right to do so. So did Kevin stop? Nope, he absolutely did not. He kept going, and he got caught again. So the company followed up with their warning, and they terminated their service, which I'm pretty sure made Kevin's mother go absolutely ballistic at him. But Kevin did reassure her not to worry, because he had a plan up his sleeve to deal with it. And his solution was pretty basic, but also pretty smart. Kevin simply changed the door number. Like, quite literally went down to the hardware store, picked up a new set of numbers, and replaced his old apartment number of 13 with 12B instead. He then called up the telephone company saying that there was a new unit added to the building, and this new unit required a phone service to be installed. Even listing it under a fake name. And the name that Kevin picked? James Bond. So, just from that alone, you would think that the phone operator would have realised right away that all of this was bullshit. But nope, instead the phone operator opened one contract under the name of James Bond. However, it did only take a few weeks for the phone company to realise that Kevin had goofed them once again. So, the telephone company actually opened a case file for Kevin Mitnick, and they were starting to keep a very keen eye on the 17-year-old hacker. So now we come to Kevin's first big hack. Now, as I said previously, Kevin needed a lot more networking within the hacking sphere to gain the more in-depth technological knowledge that he didn't already know. So, this opportunity would come when he met a guy who worked maintaining a mini-computer for the Los Angeles Unified School District. This guy, along with his circle of fellow hackers, had the knowledge that Kevin needed, but this knowledge would not come for free. Consisting of all the computing stereotypes that we all imagine, they and their mighty neckbeard wisdom would grant this wish of Kevin's if he could do one quest for them. Hack into the Ark. The Ark was the name given to the systems used by the Digital Equipment Corporation, the developers of an old operating system called RSTS/E, or just pronounced Restizi for short, which was coincidentally the operating system that Kevin had used on previous systems, along with the one used at the main mini-computer managed by one of his new hacking acquaintances. So, you can see where this is going. They did help Kevin with some pointers. They actually gave Kevin the dial-up number for the development team's department, which they managed to get from another proxy friend who had previously worked there. But that wasn't really any help to Kevin at all, since the number was useless without a valid account number and password. So, with no credentials to log in with, how would Kevin get in? He couldn't. They knew that he would never be able to actually get in. They basically did this as a prank on Kevin. They gave him an impossible task. Kevin, of course, realised this and thought to himself, I'll show them. Kevin had a plan. If he managed to figure out who the system administrator was, someone outside of the dev team, then he would have a chance of getting in. After calling the local switchboard in the area where the Ark was located, Kevin asked to be put through to the computer room. This, of course, was a very broad question, but with the gift of the gab, Kevin would navigate his way away from the switchboard straight to the system administrator, while Kevin was using the fake name Anton Chernov, which was the name of one of the key developers. Now, you might be asking, wouldn't they just hear Kevin's voice and know that that's not Anton? Well, you might work in a small department yourself. You might know everyone's names, and you might know what everyone's voice sounds like. Different departments are a different story. They work in another area. You don't even technically work together. They might be on another floor. And you might know their names, but you probably don't know their voices. So Kevin really was just shooting his shot and hoping for the best, praying that they would believe him. And they did. So Kevin was now talking to the system administrator, who thought that he was Anton Chernov. And Kevin told him, hey buddy, hey big guy, crazy story, someone must have deleted my Access account. Could you do me a solid, sailor, and just create a new one for me? And they did. They just made him a brand new Access account. But there was one teeny tiny issue. The credentials were sent to Chernov's email, which of course Kevin didn't have access to. Panicking, Kevin called up Jerry, the system administrator again, saying that he didn't get his email. So the system administrator just read out the credentials over the phone. The password, by the way, was buffoon. Ironic. Kevin then tried to log in. It worked. He had full remote access to the Ark. And before anyone else caught on, he very quickly nabbed all of the passwords from the other development team's logins. This was a massive achievement for Kevin, and it was likely that half of the hackers that had dared him to do this in the first place probably wouldn't have been able to do this themselves. So, of course, smugly, Kevin went back to them and claimed that he got in, which, of course, none of them believed. That was until they met up, and Kevin dialed in the credentials and got on. None of them could believe that Kevin had done this, and then Kevin explained to them exactly how he did it. However, it wasn't a very happy ending. Compared to Kevin at the time, these other guys all had much better internet connections. And once they had access to the Ark using the credentials very kindly provided by Kevin, they downloaded the source code of the Restisi operating system. So Kevin did their impossible task. So did they help him with the extra knowledge that he needed like they promised? No. No, they didn't. Instead, they straight up backstabbed Kevin and fucked him over. They took the source code, did not help Kevin in any way at all with the information that he needed, and on top of all of that, they ratted Kevin out to the company and gave the company Kevin's details. Kevin learned a big lesson there. And of course, still being a teenager at the time and wanting to impress his new friends, it makes sense why he might have trusted them so easily. But he still had his close friend Lewis, who was now actually dating Susie. Kevin would then move on to another hack in 1980, but this time it was the US leasing system. So, how would he accomplish this? Purely through social engineering. He basically called them up and said, "Oh hey, I'm from DEC support, and there is a massive bug in the version of Restisi that you're using, which could potentially make you lose all your data." Now this is a very common method of social engineering, because by putting pressure on individuals, especially ones with very little technical knowledge, it makes them panic. And when people panic, they tend to make bad decisions. And of course, no one, especially a large company, wants to lose data. So, after being dialed through and being granted admin access, Kevin made a new account for himself and he patched the code for them. And by patch, I really mean he just added a backdoor to their operating system. This meant that Kevin now had full access to their system. All from just a phone call. Of course, Kevin shared this news with Lewis, but not with Susie. Kevin didn't seem to like Susie very much, and the feeling was mutual. They did not get along. But, of course, Lewis would tell Susie what Kevin had done, spilling the whole tin of beans to her, which Kevin probably didn't do in the first place for good reason. Because shortly after this, Lewis and Susie broke up for unknown reasons. But after the breakup, Susie, using the credentials that Lewis gave her, accessed the system, unbeknownst to Kevin. Susie then apparently deleted most of the company's files, along with printing on all the printers in the building a message that said, "Mitnick was here, Mitnick was here, fuck you, fuck you." Because she had always hated Kevin, she tried to get him caught and fuck him over. But Kevin would never forget this. And when he was hacking another telephone company, he needed a telephone line that would ring several times but would go unanswered. A common thing among hackers. Hey, I totally am the sysadmin. Here, call this department and check if you don't believe me. But then no one answers the phone, etc, etc. You know how it goes. And the story goes that Kevin knew a random payphone to call in the local area, and he knew the number off by heart. In an absolutely crazy coincidence, Kevin gave the payphone a quick call himself to test the line and also make sure that no one was nearby who would answer the phone and ruin the whole plan. But someone did answer. Guess who just so happened to be walking past the phone? Susie. Once she picked up, Kevin recognised her voice right away. And Kevin immediately jumped on this golden opportunity. He said to her, "Hi Susan, it's Kevin. I just want you to know that I'm watching every move you make. Don't fuck with me. Bye bye." And then he hung up. I'm sure that would have absolutely scared her shitless, and it did get her off Kevin's back for the time being. Nothing would actually come of this hack until later on in some later charges that Kevin would face. But it's key to remember that he was still technically a minor at this time, so he wasn't too concerned about being caught. Until he was first caught. Remember previously when he was escorted off of campus by the police, but they couldn't actually charge him with anything because there weren't any laws yet for cybercrime? Well, the rules of the game have now changed, in that there are now rules. Cybercrime laws were now in place. The year is 1981, and Mitnick and a few other phone freaks, hackers and other such types all decide to gather together for a party at Shakey's Pizza. They sit and converse about what companies they've hacked into, their methods, and they chat about other nerdy stuff like ham radios, etc. You know, classic tech enthusiast stuff. On the discussion of what places they've hacked into, one place got mentioned a lot. A place called Cosmos, or known as the Computer System for Mainframe Operations in English. Basically, this was the central system used by Pacific Telephone, a local telephone company at the time. Kevin, Lewis, and another guy named Mark Ross realised that the Cosmos building was actually nearby. It was just a few miles away. This, of course, tempted them far too much. They thought, how about we go down there and do a little snooping around? Maybe a little bit of dumpster diving. So, keeping their team small to just the three of them, they went to a 24-hour pharmacy to get the essentials. Rubber gloves and flashlights. The tools of any major heist movie. After getting there and searching the bins, they didn't find anything of value. But then Kevin suggested, hey, why don't we try and get inside the building? Surely there'll be something of much more value inside. And when I say value, I don't mean jewellery, money, or a secret vault or anything like that. Remember, they're hackers, not robbers. They were relying on Kevin's social engineering skills to get them in. So they decided, fuck it, let's give it a bash. So Kevin walks inside and sees a security guard, a younger man who seemed like he may partake in a little bit of the devil's cabbage from time to time. So Kevin walks up to the security guard and says to him that he and his friends were out late and that Kevin actually works there and he would just like to show his friends around his place of work. The guard then says to him, oh yeah, go right ahead, just remember to sign in. That was it. They were in. No IDs, no checks, nothing, they were in. As someone who used to work in security, fired on the spot. If I knew he'd done that, I would honestly, on the spot, I would rip his fucking head off and throw him out the building. Fired immediately. I would try and get his license taken off of him for being so fucking stupid. That man has no business being a fucking guard. But after the three guys who were now in the fucking building searched around a little and mapped out the phone company's operations, suddenly, there it was. Cosmos. They had all of the paper listings of every wire centre in Southern California. This was the jackpot, but it gets better. They found plenty of account credentials, but most importantly, they needed the admin credentials. And Kevin opened one folder, and there it was. A sheet literally labelled passwords. You guys were probably all expecting 12 computer screens with flashing green text matrix screensavers, sunglasses, trench coats, infected mushrooms playing in the background. You know, not just walking into a building, opening a filing cabinet and pulling out a sheet of paper. So of course, Kevin was absolutely buzzing. They had found the mother of all omelettes, so they wouldn't fret over losing a couple of eggs. So their plan was to take the original copies of the all-important files and make a new copy of them somehow. This was so they could replace the originals so that staff wouldn't come in and realise that they were missing, because then they would just reset all the passwords. It was important for the staff to not know that these files had been taken. But this would involve the use of a printer, so they needed to find a printer shop to then copy the documents and then return the originals before any of the staff realised anything had gone down. Sounds absolutely foolproof, doesn't it? Well, possibly. Because even when these three random guys left this building carrying stacks of manuals and documents, the security guard still didn't challenge them. I hate... even though it's a funny story, I fucking hate this security guard so much. Thing was, this was around 2 a.m. So where are they going to find a printer shop that was open at this time? Well, they wouldn't find one. And they couldn't go back just in case it was close to the shifts changing. Plus, the security guard probably wouldn't believe the same story twice. Which, I beg to differ, that guy was a fucking idiot. He absolutely would have believed it for a third time. So, instead, they took the files home, but Kevin felt very uneasy about keeping them. So, he got Lewis to disperse them in various trash cans throughout the town. Then, not long after this, Susie came back into the picture. You see, although Lewis and Susie weren't in a relationship anymore, he still talked to her, and it turns out that Lewis couldn't keep his mouth shut even in this scenario of all scenarios that you would keep quiet about. And Lewis told her what he and Kevin had done. So, he told Susie about the manuals that they stole, and of course, Susie would rat on them yet again. A few days later, as Kevin was driving home from his job at the time as a receptionist, he noticed an unusual car. You see, Kevin at this time was pretty familiar with the police system, and he noticed a Ford Crown Victoria which had 3 men inside. Okay, maybe no need to panic, so he drives off and does a U-turn to see if they follow him. They follow him. He speeds up and goes onto the freeway, and they are still following him. But now, one of them reaches out of the window and places that little light on the roof. Of course, undercover cops. Kevin is sensible, however, so he's not going to have a high-speed chase with the cops and try to run away. So Kevin pulls over, and according to him, the cops all leap out and draw their guns, screaming at him to get out of the car. Boom, Kevin was caught and put in handcuffs. One of the cops shouts at Kevin and says, "You're going to stop fucking around with the phone company, we're going to teach you a lesson." Remember, Kevin is still a juvenile, and as a juvenile, when it comes to the law, you have a few extra leniencies. But Kevin wouldn't get any of those this time. Another police car then shows up. Kevin is, of course, very distraught about his current situation, until one of the officers shouted to another officer to search Kevin's car for a logic bomb. The police thought that a logic bomb was an actual physical bomb. It's not surprising that police in the 80s were just not tech literate. To be honest, the modern police aren't really tech literate either. Kevin was soon taken down to jail and placed in a cell. Kevin was then transferred to juvenile hall so he could be brought to court the next day. And when he was in court, the judge just seemed baffled by the situation. A hacker? What's that? What the fuck is a hacker? Like, the legal system didn't really have a concept of this stuff. Like, all of this stuff was brand new. Kevin was being charged as a hacker. Now, at the time, there really wasn't the concept of a good or neutral hacker. You know, white hats, black hats, etc., etc. In the eyes of the law, all hackers were bad. But Kevin hadn't actually done anything malicious with the data and the systems that he got access to. He didn't get any proprietary software, high-value computers, or anything like that. Yes, he did get unauthorised access to a building without force, and he did take confidential credentials. But that was it, really. The judge could tell that there was more to this story. Kevin wasn't there for financial gain or anything of the like. It was just the age-old temptation of exploring what you're not allowed to explore. The thrill of getting access to a challenging and so-called secure system. Kevin was, for a lack of better words, a young, thrill-seeking hacker with an enthusiasm for technology. This ended with Kevin receiving a 90-day psychological evaluation in a juvenile facility. He'd spent the full time there and he would very often write letters home to his family. But he would be turning 18 soon. In any other case, he might have received a prison sentence when he turned 18, but the facility recommended that he be released on probation, which was granted by the court. Kevin received counselling because the courts and the juvenile facility didn't see his crimes as an act of violence or an urge to gain cash. They saw them as more of an addiction. And maybe they were. But would Kevin stop hacking there? Of course not, he was just getting started. Again, he would hack another campus, but this time it was the University of Southern California. But he got caught again, which obviously violated his probation. And he got sent to juvie again, but this time for 6 months. All of the fuss that Kevin had been causing, of course, drew attention to his name, especially in the media. This is where his new hacking pseudonym would come around, so let me explain this one. After 6 months in juvie, Kevin was eventually given an early release, with some conditions. When Kevin was asked what conditions would be needed to stop him from hacking, Kevin came up with a way to explain it to these tech-illiterate savages so that they could better understand, because the government institutions, the people that worked in juvie, everyone was tech-illiterate, right? It was the 80s, right? No one knew much about computers except for specific hobbyists, right? So he had to figure out a way to explain the different types of hacking to them. They had no concept of ethical hacking versus malicious hacking. So Kevin described the bad form of hacking as dark side hacking, using Star Wars as a reference, which of course would have been very popular at the time. An LA Times reporter somehow came across this conversation. I wonder how a reporter managed to get a hold of private minutes from a psychological evaluation. You would think that type of stuff would be top secret and all that, you know, patient confidentiality, but hey-ho, who cares? Journalists are just human filth. But anyway, this is where Kevin would gain the name of Kevin Mitnick, the dark side hacker. And this would only be the start of the media taking an interest in Kevin's story. So, after his release, can you guess how Kevin got into trouble again? Well, this time he was actually trying to do something good. He ended up getting a job at 20th Century Fox, where he was being trained as a software developer, learning new languages for him like COBOL and basic assembly language. Plus, on top of this, he was learning about mini-computers, just like the Ark that he hacked into not too long ago. This would seem like a good turn in life for Kevin, but things weren't going to be that smooth. After only 2 months, Kevin lost the job due to an internal issue with other employees, because apparently a union ruled that the position that Kevin was given should have been offered to employees that were already working there. Which is a shame for Kevin. and his life might have taken a completely different path if he was allowed to keep this job. So, now jobless and potentially feeling pretty shitty already, things would get even worse when Kevin's parole officer phoned him one day. All he said was this: "Kevin, have a big breakfast. Eat all you can, then come to see me." If your parole officer tells you that, something bad's about to happen. This is another kind of funny scenario. You see, since Kevin had already been caught several times before and he was now well known to the police as a hacker and they thought he was this insane hacker that could manipulate any piece of technology, Kevin often got blamed for unanswered technical mishaps. This, combined with the state's complete lack of knowledge when it came to technology, made them blame Kevin for any issues that went down. Now, of course, when I say that, I don't mean that Kevin got blamed for every single hack going on in the United States that was unaccounted for, but he would very often end up on the list of suspects. One example was when his previous parole officer had a mishap with her phone. The phone company fixed the issue for her, but said they couldn't figure out what actually caused the problem. So she just blamed it on Kevin. She just assumed that, oh, Kevin must have tried to hack my phone, and put it on his file. This was then accepted as fact on his record without any other evidence. And it wasn't Kevin. The dumb bitch just had a problem with her phone. As you can imagine, Kevin was quite used to this by now, and probably quite sick of it. But it wasn't this previous incident that was causing him trouble now. During his downtime, Kevin, of course, would still mess around with his ham radios. And in particular, in LA at the time, there was a certain repeater group which was dubbed by the radio enthusiasts as Animal House. And those guys were essentially all-out chaos. They would try to jam and intercept other people's radio transmissions, and of course they would shitpost all over the radio. You know, like an old-school COD lobby. So it turns out that Kevin would frequent on the Animal House signal, on which he would apparently annoy various people, which led to him annoying the wrong person. One guy, who must have got really pissed off at Kevin, proceeded to call the parole office to complain that Kevin had hacked into the company that he was working for, that company being Xerox. The combination of Kevin already having a bad reputation and past history for doing similar things, along with this guy seeming to be a reputable source, was enough for Kevin to get dragged in front of his parole officer again. While his mother was waiting in the lobby for him, Kevin was soon handcuffed and arrested again and sent off to Van Nuys jail, where he would await a parole board meeting. While at the station, Kevin would make a few phone calls to various friends and family to see what could be done, since things could only get worse from here on out. Now, thankfully for Kevin, the parole board didn't take the accusation too seriously, because there wasn't even any evidence of any hack even being done or at least committed by Kevin. But he wouldn't get off scot-free, because in his parole conditions he was told to stop using his ham radio. But apparently at the time it was only the FCC that had the authority to take these privileges away from him. But hey-ho, the government had already fucked Kevin over, so why stop now? Kevin would receive 60 days in jail, but he had already served most of it, being released just a few days later. And you know, sometimes when you're somewhere for so long, you need a little bit of a souvenir. So Kevin told his mother to drive to the LA Police Academy. We aren't sure what specifically Kevin was looking for, but apparently there were license plate frames that you could buy from there that were cop-friendly. Meaning, if the cops saw that you had police academy plates, they were a lot less likely to pull you over, which of course would be a great benefit for Kevin, especially with his last encounter. But while Kevin was there, he would find something much more valuable. A stack of books, but not just any books. LA Police Academy yearbooks, containing a photo of every LAPD officer that they had trained, including the undercover ones. Kevin kept these for future reference. But of course, being sent to juvie and jail again wouldn't deter Kevin from hacking. So on his downtime, he managed to get another job at a family friend's company, helping out with computer-related issues there. Kevin and an old hacker friend of his, Big Stephen Rhodes again, would both regularly use the computers at Kevin's work, which, of course, wasn't them exactly, asking for trouble or anything. Well, one day, Kevin was out having lunch with a female colleague of his, and he noticed a group of guys who were wearing suits. And Kevin recognised them. They were cops. They obviously weren't here to just have a catch-up with him, so rather than running, which would attract attention, Kevin hugged the girl that he was with, and he quickly told her that he saw an old friend that he didn't want to talk to, and he was trying to avoid them. This worked as a good ploy for now, so they both made their way into the car, avoiding the undercover cops. So Kevin now had to figure out if these guys were actually tailing him. So he made his way to a payphone and he called the LAPD, and he made good use of his social engineering skills. He managed to finesse his way over to the records department and he asked them if there had been any hits, which means is there an outgoing warrant, for a Kevin Mitnick. And there was. So what options did Kevin have? Well, it was either turn himself in or wait to be arrested again. But there was a third option. Run. Run away and wait till things blow over. Apparently, Kevin had found out that if he was to wait just 2 years after the commitment date, the jurisdiction of the juvenile court would expire, meaning he could possibly just vanish and wait it out unless he was caught. So the plan was set in motion. Kevin would leave his home and move around 150 miles away to a place called Oroville, where he would stay with some friends of a family friend. Successfully, he managed to move to this homestead and it was far away from any commotion. But it also meant that there was no tech for him to use, besides a TV for him to watch the occasional game show. This was of course a very different change of pace for Kevin, staying on a mini farm with an older couple, but it would help him avoid the authorities for now. While hidden away in a more remote part of California, many people started a rumour that Kevin had actually fled to Israel, which wasn't true. But this rumour would spread and even affect him later in life, which we'll get into soon. But for now, Kevin would stick it out in the country for 4 months before receiving a call from his attorney who confirmed that he had been discharged from the youth authority, and within a few days, he was back in Los Angeles. So after being on the run for only a few months and essentially getting off the hook, Kevin would get straight back into his old antics. His next steps were of course to hack more things, but to do so he would need to increase his general knowledge again. Something to sharpen his current skills and take himself up a level. At this time, Kevin had his eyes on General Telephone again, and with him already being so knowledgeable in hacking them, he was brazenly sure that he could land himself a job there, which would bring a lot more than just a good wage. After doing some research, Kevin found out that the company actually takes on graduates from a local technical school called the CLC, or Computer Learning Center in Los Angeles. This would be his ticket into General Telephone systems. But studying at the CLC was a big change for Kevin, not just academically, but also socially. For starters, this was kind of an uptight school that required all students to dress formally, and by formally, I mean full suit and tie. And Kevin hadn't worn a suit since, well, his last court date. But now 23 and with some added kgs, Kevin had to get some new drip so he could attend this school. So, with what money his mother could get together, he bought 2 new suits. Besides the uptightness of the school, Kevin apparently really enjoyed himself, learning assembly languages along with messing around with more high-level languages. But funnily enough, the one subject that Kevin didn't pay any attention to at all was hacking. Anytime it was even mentioned, Kevin would just calmly sit there and just nod his head because he wasn't paying any attention. Because his main interest was the technology itself and learning the key fundamentals of computing. But while studying, Kevin was still hacking anyway, still messing with the local phone companies and a constant cat and mouse game with them. And really, all of these hacking attempts on the surrounding telephone companies would just benefit Kevin more and more. He would learn a variety of methods to exploit their phone systems, and if the lower level approaches wouldn't work, he would just scale the ladder looking for a new open window. Now, yes, Kevin did use various technological exploits to gain access to systems, but for the most part, all of this was done with how professionally he could social engineer someone. Like, truly, this man could be described as a telephone spy, an intelligent version of the phone jacker. Oh, also, during this time, he got access to the NSA's phone lines. Ironic. But besides all of this, how was Kevin's academic career going? Well, it wasn't just all about networking with computers, as he managed to network with, and you won't believe me when I say this, a woman. Yes, that's right. Kevin managed to hack into one of the most complicated systems in the world by getting a girl to talk to him. Her name was Bonnie, and although Kevin had put on the pounds over the years, this wouldn't stop him from trying to dock his USB with her. Yes, I understand that USBs weren't created until much later. Just let me make my shit joke. You might wonder, how did this network of love begin? Well, funnily enough, with hacking. While in the computer class one day, Kevin started sliding into Bonnie's DMs, asking her if she would join him for dinner. She declined, as apparently she was engaged. Access denied. But a few days later, he asked her again, this time saying she had a beautiful smile. Access granted. But it wasn't quite that easy. After some discussion, it turns out that Bonnie had a slight suspicion that her fiancé had been lying about his finances. And who better to discuss this with than one of the best social engineers in the world? So of course, Kevin prompted her, asking if she wanted him to check it out. She agreed. After some dumpster diving, a few hours on the phone, and a little look up on his computer, Kevin had everything he needed. A credit report, the guy's bank balance, property records, and even what assets of his were frozen. Turns out, Bonnie's suspicion was correct, and her fiancé was not doing as well as he was making out to be. Now, to be clear, this does seem a little bit shitty on Kevin trying to get involved and mess around with someone's relationship for his own benefit, but to give him the benefit of the doubt, Kevin did say that he wasn't trying to undermine their relationship, and he did genuinely feel bad about the scenario. But sadly, after Kevin had confirmed Bonnie's suspicions, she broke things off with her fiancé not too long after. Within a few weeks, she and Kevin started dating. Kevin was absolutely buzzing. I mean, he had scored with a cutie despite his weight, but she apparently took a liking to Kevin quite well, making this Kevin's first ever serious relationship. This relationship would continue, and Kevin would complete his school program, even staying on longer than he had to mess around a little bit more on the campus. Besides some minor hacking in the background, Kevin went on to get a job at Bonnie's employer, GTE, the same company that Kevin had been hacking for years. So of course, he was absolutely ecstatic to get this job. He now had the job that he always wanted, and he was getting paid to do something that he loved, being a programmer. He would learn a variety of things there, although tediously he did have to be taught stuff that he was already competent at. Probably far more competent than the people who were teaching him. Because remember, he had already been hacking this company for years. And this job lasted a grand total of 9 days. So did Kevin do anything wrong or illegitimate at the company? No. Because of his skill level, Kevin was actually granted a higher level of privilege at the company. But to get this privileged access, he had to go through a background check, which resulted in GTE's security team going, "Wait a minute, we fucking know this guy." So Kevin was very quickly escorted to his desk by several members of the security team and told to pack up his stuff and get the fuck out the building. After applying for a few other jobs, Kevin had some luck. This time at a bank, of all places. But the bank put out a memo announcing his employment, saying, "Hey everyone, let's welcome Kevin Mitnick to the team." And people recognised his name from the LA Times article. So his past crimes and hacking activity had once again come back to haunt him. So what else would Kevin do if he couldn't get any legitimate work? He'd of course continue hacking in his spare time while spending the rest with his beloved Bonnie. Of course, their love would grow, and eventually they started talking about marriage, with the young people saving up whatever money they could for it. Things weren't looking too bad for them both. Bonnie was still working away and Kevin was still, well, hacking away. Until one day, Bonnie comes home to find that their apartment had been ransacked. The place had been ripped apart, so of course she contacted Kevin as soon as she could. But something was off with the suspected robbery. It had a subtle glow to it all. You see, when Kevin asked Bonnie if their wedding money was still there, it was there, but it had been laid out on the kitchen counter right next to a search warrant. They'd been raided by the cops. The only things that were missing was Kevin's computer and hard disks. Oh dear, oh no, oh fucking no. I mean, a break-in would have been preferable because the burglars would have had no idea what to do with any of the data on there. But the cops, well, they were a bit of a different story. It was past the damage control stage and straight onto the abandoned ship stage. Kevin met up with Bonnie and his mother in a local park to discuss what to do next. You see, Kevin wasn't too concerned about what would happen with the law as he hadn't done anything too crazy. He had figured out that the search must have been related to a hack he was working on when he was poking around in the systems of a company called Santa Cruz Operations. Not downloading any source code or doing anything malicious, just having a little look around. But Kevin's main concern was hurting those around him again. He didn't want to put his mother, potential wife, or his grandmother through even more pain by being sent back to prison. Worse yet, he didn't want to lose his love at the time, Bonnie. But it turns out that she showed her true loyalty when, instead of giving him shit, she stuck by him and supported him. Everyone was trying to take their next steps. For starters, Bonnie tried to get some time off of work to help deal with all of this by claiming it was a family emergency. But when she called her boss to take the time off, her boss informed her that some police officers had stopped by wanting to talk to her. Because Kevin had been hacking from her apartment on her telephone line. But the cops didn't suspect that she was the hacker. Especially after her boss had told the cops, "Oh yeah, her boyfriend, Kevin Mitnick." The cops very quickly understood who was the one responsible. So the cops were now trying to get to Kevin through his girlfriend. Kevin sort of guessed that this would all boil down to a case of either admit what you did or your girlfriend will receive some kind of punishment. So Kevin and Bonnie decided to just hand themselves in, and they were both arrested. However, to this day, according to Kevin, there is no official record of their arrest because the police actually neglected to take any fingerprints or photos of them. Goes to show what type of organisation they were dealing with. But some good came out of this. Kevin and Bonnie soon married each other for two reasons. Firstly, because they already planned to get married, and secondly, being married meant that Bonnie couldn't testify against Kevin in court. Plus, they could visit each other if Kevin was ever jailed. So, in a fast fashion, they married each other in a not-so-fancy wedding, but nonetheless, they were officially married. Thankfully, any charges against Bonnie were dropped, and Kevin would only be given a $216 fine and 3 years of probation, meaning Kevin would get another probation officer again. But when picking up his stuff from the station, Kevin got his computer back, but not the drives. Meaning one of two things. Either A, the cops had simply forgotten them or lost them, which is, see if you ever have anything seized by the cops, really fucking common, or B, the cops were still analysing them for other evidence of other hacks. Which, if the latter was true, then Kevin was basically fucked. As the drives did contain evidence of some previous hacks of another telephone company that Kevin had hacked years ago. And unfortunately, it was scenario B. They had found the evidence that they needed and they handed it over to the Pacific Bell security team. Kevin managed to get a hold of some information on the investigation by again socially engineering their staff to fax over some memos about him. And Kevin was right. They had a full breakdown of what information he got and how far into their systems he got. But for now, things went quiet. But in the meantime, despite all of this shit hanging over his head, Kevin would continue hacking. A year later, Kevin, along with an old hacker friend of his, Lenny DiCiccio, enrolled back in college. The exact same college that Kevin had done some hacking in before and got in trouble. And when he got on campus, he did it again. he did the exact same thing again. He and his partner went on campus and used the campus computers to hack other systems. When using the campus terminals to hack into a company that they had already previously hacked into, DEC, they left a cartridge in the computer for the script to run. But you see, since these were public computers, it would only be a matter of time until someone looked at the screen and saw what was happening. And Kevin and Lenny soon found out that that is exactly what happened when they were told by an old friend of theirs who was also attending the college that he overheard some of the staff discussing the situation. As you can imagine, the college reported this to the police. But since Kevin and Lenny never went back for the tape, because they knew that the staff were now watching, they had no evidence that it was those two who were behind it. But the staff and the cops were pretty sure who the culprits were, they just couldn't prove it. You know, that old chestnut where, we can't prove it was you, but it was probably you. While that would save them as far as the cops were concerned, as in they faced no charges, it wouldn't save them from the university, who kicked Kevin and Lenny out based on this circumstantial evidence. You see, this would be one of the largest turning points in Kevin's story. He had already been double-crossed by various people along his hacking journey, and they wouldn't be the last. Alright, the earlier backstabs were still shit for Kevin, but all of those happened when he was still a juvenile and wouldn't get in too much trouble. But it wouldn't be long until Lenny would start to have a little bit of a glow about him. Lenny and Kevin had been hacking together for a while, and Lenny had already thrown Kevin under the bus in a previous hack they committed together, but not to the cops, to the FBI. This was only the beginning to his antics. You may think, Kevin, what the fuck, why would you keep hacking with this guy after he pulled that shit? And of course, we aren't really sure of all the details and accounts of what exactly went on, so I'm sure the scenario wasn't quite as black and white as that, you know, from an outside perspective. But maybe Kevin was just a very forgiving person. Either way, the two of them would focus on hacking into DEC again, who seemed to have been a very popular target at the time because another set of hackers known as the Chaos Computer Club, or the CCC for short, had already been sticking their fingers into Digital's pie. And we'll get back to them in a moment, but for now, what was the main motive for Kevin and Lenny having an obsession with hacking DEC? Well, if you remember last time Kevin hacked them, at that time they were developing a popular operating system called Restizi. But this time they were working on another operating system called VMS. So, if they could pull the source code for that, they could find flaws in the operating system security that they could then exploit. So, after some digging around, Kevin and Lenny managed to exploit a dormant account on DEC's development cluster, which they both managed to do as a duo. Kevin on the phone using his social engineering skills with the employee, while Lenny was on the computer trying to gain access with the information relayed by Kevin. This worked perfectly, and with low suspicion as well, as rather than creating new accounts on the system, which of course would raise a few flags, they used a dormant account that was already in place that had a high level of system privileges. Once they had access, things were in motion. They quickly located the source code and started implementing some safety nets of their own. This came in the form of a tool they uploaded that apparently managed to disable any security audits without raising any alarms, which would allow them to further exploit the network by creating more accounts with high privileges, along with changing credentials of older accounts that hadn't been used in over half a year, just so they had some backups. Once the groundwork could be laid down, it was time for Kevin to do some proper snooping on the network, on which Kevin discovered another account by the name of Andy Goldstein. So what did Kevin do? He checked Goldstein's emails, and Kevin found that another researcher in the UK had been sending Mr. Goldstein reports on security bugs that he had found throughout the system so that these bugs could be patched. One particular vulnerability was documented to have been exploited by a certain group known as the Chaos Computer Club. So this of course caught the attention of Kevin. Not due to discovering some handy exploits that he could use himself, Kevin was a lot more interested in the other hackers because, as we've seen before, Kevin has always had a thirst for more information and learning new techniques, especially from competent hackers. After dabbling a little into their research, Kevin discovered that these guys were located in Germany, and he found the name of their leader, and he managed to track down his number and get in contact with him. We aren't sure who the leader was at the time, we can only speculate, but Kevin nonetheless would start chatting to the other members of this club, trying to gain an insight into more hacks and tricks. Plus, at this point within the underground hacking sphere, Kevin had made quite a name for himself and he had gained some popularity. This would lead Kevin to finally retrieving the printouts detailing the hacks that these German hackers had been working on that weren't open to the public, allowing for Kevin and Lenny to implement them with ease. This would lead them to recursively adapt the tools that were given to them by the Chaos Computing Club, adapting it to new versions of the operating system as it came out. But of course, after more and more systems were getting compromised, company programmers would write security tools that were made to detect the exact tools that were used by the Chaos Computer Club. But Kevin made sure to keep one step ahead of them, and along with Lenny, they would just simply modify the tools they already had so they wouldn't be detected. This would of course lead to Kevin and Lenny infecting various systems with the modified tools, one of which was JPL, or the Jet Propulsion Laboratory owned by NASA. But unlike the other companies they had been messing with, NASA's a little bit more up there, a little bit more federal, a little bit more national security level type stuff. So NASA did manage to notice that some unauthorized changes were being made to their systems, which led them to reverse engineer the code to try and identify what was being uploaded. But fortunately for Kevin, rather than drawing attention to him, NASA looked at the tools and saw that they were very similar to the same kinds of tools used by the Chaos Computer Club, leading NASA to believe that they were the ones who were behind it. So thankfully for Kevin, he had dodged the Department of Defence for now. But now, this is where things get a little bit weird for Kevin, and quite honestly, a little bizarre. You see, for the most part, Kevin has managed to dodge the feds when going solo. But you're only as strong as your weakest link, and it seems as soon as he starts collaborating with other hackers, things get a little bit complicated. Lenny had already been suspicious before, with him already spilling info to the feds, and it would only get worse from there. This eventually came around after he and Kevin made a little bet together. The story goes something like this. At Lenny's work, they had installed new digital locks on the computer rooms. Underestimating Kevin, Lenny made him a bet that he couldn't guess the code, which, honestly, Kevin wouldn't have been able to. It just wasn't realistic. But Kevin still took him up on the bet. Can you take a wild guess what happened? While they were in the office, Kevin had noticed a wallet under the desk. So he pretended to drop his pen and he picked up the wallet and hid it in his sock. Then he made up that he had to go to the bathroom. While away from Lenny, he searched the wallet not for money, not for credit cards, but instead just for some paper. And he found some paper, on which was the code for the door. This sounds really silly, and Kevin felt the same way. I mean, surely you'd think that Lenny wouldn't just keep the code written down in his wallet. Kevin even thought that all of this, like finding the wallet on the ground and all that, might have been an elaborate plan to try and troll Kevin. Kevin managed to go back and stash the wallet before Lenny could see. Lenny gave Kevin an hour to figure out the code. Lenny, however, had no idea that Kevin had already seen the code. So Lenny left because he had to go and fetch something, and he left Kevin to his own devices. As soon as he left, Kevin tried the code for the door, and it worked. He managed to get into the computer room. And while he was in there, he also managed to log on to all of the computers and gain full access to the system, all while Lenny was still out. Lenny then returned to see Kevin sitting in the computer room, just grinning with a smug look on his face. Lenny was clearly very pissed off, claiming that Kevin had cheated, which I suppose you could say that maybe he did. But a bet was a bet, and Kevin just held out his hand asking for the $150 that they had bet on. Of course, Lenny wasn't going to give him the money, so Kevin just messed around with him for a while, not taking it too seriously according to him. But Lenny seemed a little bit bothered by it. And this is where things start to go downhill rapidly. As we know already, Kevin is a little bit of a joker. A prankster, if you will. So again, not taking things too seriously, he thought he would pull a little prank on Lenny at his work, as he's been known to do before. So, to mess with him, Kevin phoned Lenny's work, specifically the accounting department, claiming to be from the IRS, saying that Lenny's paycheck was to be withheld from him. Official IRS business, madam. I'm sure you'll understand. And of course, they believed him, though they did request this in the form of an official fax. Remember faxes? But Kevin wasn't going to fax anything. He wasn't actually going to fully go through with his plan, he was just shitposting. So the accounts department would still give Lenny his paycheck. However, Lenny's boss was then informed that the IRS had called them concerning Lenny. And Lenny's boss pulled him up for it. And Lenny did not take that well. One thing led to another, and for some reason, maybe out of spite, Lenny went to his boss and told them that he and Kevin had been hacking into DEC from their offices. Though some other stories have speculated that the staff at Lenny's work had already guessed it was Kevin, prompting them to ask Lenny about both the IRS and if he had any troubles with Kevin. This then led to Lenny confessing what he and Kevin had been up to, claiming Kevin had forced him into it. Now, although this may sound rather one-sided, Kevin may not be entirely innocent in this scenario, as other sources have claimed that Kevin was quite insistent with hacking, to the point it would apparently cause tension both in his friendships with Lenny and another friend Lewis, along with his relationship with Bonnie. Kevin would apparently spend many nights hacking away while lying to Bonnie that he was studying or doing something else. Although these are all just allegations, we don't actually know if this is true or not. So Kevin was a little bit fucked. But rather than instantly calling the police, Lenny and his boss would sit down with the security staff from DEC and cover everything they had been through, which would lead to the FBI being brought in to do a sting operation. Lenny would be wired up, the computers would be monitored, and now all they'd need is for Kevin to unsuspectingly join in on the fun. Well, Kevin was still wanting to focus on DEC, specifically on one researcher from England that had been helping with the security flaws in their software. Throughout their hacking session, Kevin could tell that Lenny seemed a little bit off. But when he asked him about it, he would just say that he was tired. After a few hours, they would finish up. But really, this was just the beginning of another judicial arc for Kevin. A few days later, Lenny would call Kevin to tell him that he was ready to give him his money that he won from the bet, which Kevin would have probably been pretty psyched about. Unbeknownst to Kevin, however, this was all a setup. Kevin would drive into the parking lot at Lenny's work in his Nissan Pulsar to meet him. But Lenny knew that he had to lure Kevin out of his car and get him to pop the trunk. Reason being, his trunk is where he would keep the other evidence of their hacking tools, as well as other pieces of data that they might have copied during their sessions, which, of course, would help convict Kevin. And if the trunk is open, it means that the FBI agents can just look inside instead of having to get a warrant. After some chatting, Lenny did manage to get Kevin out of the car, claiming that he wanted the hard disk so he could send terminal emulator software to another friend. After stepping out of the car, Lenny apparently said to Kevin, "You know that feeling in your stomach when you're about to get arrested? Well, get ready." Various cars then appeared from nowhere and surrounded Kevin, with the usual men in suits pouring from them, shouting FBI, FBI. At first, Kevin thought that this might have been an elaborate prank to fuck with him as revenge for his previous prank, but it was not. And that was it. Kevin was backstabbed again, and while he was being arrested, Lenny was smiling, laughing, and dancing in Kevin's face. Kevin asked Lenny if he could at least phone his mother to tell her that he'd been arrested. And Lenny didn't even do that. Unlike the past few times when Kevin was arrested, this time he would not be getting off easily. He was charged with the various hacking sessions on DEC, and he would be sentenced to 12 months in prison, along with 3 years of supervised release, along with undergoing counselling for his addiction. You might be thinking, did Lenny get off easy? Well, comparatively, yes. Lenny only got 750 hours of community service, along with 5 years of probation. The funny thing is, they wouldn't even allow Kevin to go on bail due to the myth that he had fled to Israel a few years prior to avoid a previous punishment. Kevin would honestly have a very hard time both in the courts and in the press. Many journalists would refer to him as the stereotypical overweight computer nerd that had nothing better to do than to drink Slurpees and hack computers. What made things even worse, besides the slander, was the fact that the court, of course, weren't technology... This is a long video, I'm going to keep going. Technologically literate. One claim made by US Attorney Leon Weidman was that Kevin could whistle a certain frequency into a telephone and launch nuclear missiles from the NORAD system. Now, you don't have to be technically literate to know that that's a giant pile of shite. That is a giant pile of shite. That has literally never been possible. But This might have helped into scaring the magistrate into their decision to refuse bail, along with the other accusations. Just a wee quick side tangent, the reason that the courts might have believed this dial-a-nuke bullshit is because there was another phone phreaker at the time named Captain Crunch. And the reason he got his name is because he discovered that the little whistle toys that you got in Captain Crunch cereal boxes actually produced a frequency that allowed you to make free calls if you blew it down the phone line. This might have been why the courts believed all that nuke bullshit. So yeah, frequencies down the phone line was a thing, but no, you couldn't launch fucking nukes with it. They also wouldn't let Kevin have bail because when armed with a keyboard, Kevin posed a danger to society. And he was also not allowed to have unmonitored access to a telephone. He was still allowed to make arranged calls to specific people, but that wouldn't stop him. While they would be making these arranged calls for him, Kevin managed to hang up the payphone behind his back and dial a new number. This, of course, would patch him through to an operator, and Kevin would simultaneously pretend to still be talking to the person he initially called, while also saying the correct things to answer the operator on the other line. Which, I mean, come on, that's pretty impressive. Kevin would do this successfully on various occasions, to the point where the prison couldn't figure out how he was making these direct calls to unsanctioned people he was not allowed to call. This led to them installing a payphone just outside of his prison cell, so they could pass him the handset through the bars, but Kevin couldn't access the base unit, or any of the buttons, because they were all sealed on the other side of the cell door. So yeah, he wouldn't be able to carry on with that trickery anymore. Finally, Kevin would be reunited with solitude. He was locked up in solitary confinement with the occasional visit from his wife Bonnie, as well as his mother and grandmother to break up the time that he spent alone. But things were just going to get worse, because after spending time in prison, it seemed his wife Bonnie wasn't happy with how things were going, and she ended up filing for divorce. And while in prison, Kevin did actually manage to call her via his phone phreaking, but it seemed that prison for Kevin was the last straw for Bonnie. This, of course, was a big shock for Kevin, because when reading his personal notes on his situation, it seemed that Kevin did actually really love her and was planning to spend the rest of his life with her. Kevin did have his suspicions, and he thought that another guy must have been involved. So of course, he wanted to do what snooping he could while locked up, since this had seemed like such a strange change of heart for her. And he was right. There was another guy. After some messing around with the answering machine of Bonnie's apartment, Kevin managed to hear both sides of their conversation. At this point, Kevin wasn't able to confirm who it was, but after being moved to a halfway house, Kevin could leave for a few selected appointments and visits, which included going to see Bonnie. While attempting to get back with her, Kevin noticed that she had left a phone bill out. It turns out that she had been spending hours on the phone with one of Kevin's closest friends, Louis DePayne. Not long after this, she moved in with Louis. Because obviously, if you don't like your husband going to prison for being a hacker, the sensible choice is to go with another hacker. Soon after leaving prison, Kevin had traded his addiction for hacking for another one: lifting. He was now very focused on getting into shape and apparently became quite the gym rat, working out for hours at a time. Working out for hours at a time. That's a normal workout session. A lot of yous know that I use writers and researchers to help me with my scripts, especially one this big. And this motherfucker's actually wrote working out for hours at a time. That's a normal workout session. That's a normal workout session. You know what? Everyone watching, try and guess the BMI of the guy that wrote that sentence. You're probably correct. But anyway, this led to Kevin losing the pounds, not fitting with the previous archetype that the media had portrayed him as. Fucking hours at a time. One of my sessions is at least like 2.5 hours. Fuck's sake, go to the fucking gym. Of course, Kevin would keep on hacking. But for that short period after his prison sentence, he would focus on himself. But in the background, he would have this constant worry that he was being monitored by the FBI, which is a creepy thing to have to worry about. So he wanted to try and create some form of relief by somehow concealing his calls. How would he do this? Well, Kevin didn't know. But Kevin knew phones, and he was very determined. So it was only a matter of time before Kevin figured out how to do this. The year is 1991 in the Las Vegas Convention Center, and Kevin is there attending CES. And no, he wouldn't be hacking into any tech companies or trying to exploit any systems there. His plan was to hack, but not now. He was just going to do some social engineering at the con and do a little bit of networking. Because you see, when calling people, there is a particular identification number known as an ESN, electronic serial number, along with the phone number or MIN, mobile identification number, which is basically used to verify if the individual is a subscriber of whatever phone company, what address these numbers are registered to, etc., etc. So if Kevin could change these numbers or mask them somehow, it would be very difficult to tap into or listen to his calls because they would look like someone else's calls. But figuring out exactly how to do this was going to be very difficult to do. Because to do this, Kevin would need to figure out if there was an inbuilt way to do it via the phone he already had, or potentially another way. So, who better to ask than the phone company itself? Kevin had a Novatel phone, so Novatel would be the target. While at the convention, Kevin used a payphone to call into their HQ in Alberta, Canada, doing his usual navigating between the secretaries right to the engineering department. He managed to talk to a chap named Kumamoto. Thankfully, the manager wasn't there at the time, which was the perfect chance for Kevin to do some social manipulation, using the pretext that he was at CES representing Novatel and he wanted to do some demos with the phones they were trying to sell. But he needed to change the ESNs of the phones and asked Kumamoto if there was any way he could do that via the phone itself, hoping that maybe there was a certain key sequence that would allow him to reprogram it. Unfortunately, there wasn't. But, and a big but, Kumamoto said that there was a specific firmware version which could be used to reprogram the ESN. This version, however, was used by the FCC for testing. But now, Kevin knows it exists. And he wanted it. But the thing is, unlike other forms of software, this would be burned onto an EEPROM chip, or in English, an erasable programmable read-only memory chip. Basically, a chip that isn't usually meant to be written to like your normal hard disk, so it wouldn't be as easy as just downloading the software to his phone. He would need a chip programmed for it. So, of course, Kevin asked Kumamoto-san, "Senpai, can I have the chip, please?" To which... I miss him. To which Kumamoto-san said, "Of course. How many do you want?" Jackpot. But Kevin still had to get these delivered to him while he was still at the convention. So, by again coming up with some more on-the-spot bullshit, Kevin convinced them to FedEx them to his hotel, under the name of Mike Bishop. All while things were falling into place, Kevin was shitting it. Because, I mean, you never know. Would a bunch of FBI agents turn up to the hotel instead after Novatel caught on? Would they truly all fall for it? Was it too good to be true? Well, before we get to the climax, Kevin still had to get some ESN numbers. So his next call would be to LA Cellular to finesse some numbers. Using the pretext of some system failures going on, he asked the clerk if there were any recent phones being activated in the last few hours. And there was, a total of 4. So he said to the clerk that he would need the ESN numbers of those customers so he could reactivate them. Adding the classic, "We wouldn't want any unhappy customers now, would we?" in order to help sell the bit. And like a charm, it worked. But collecting the package with the EEPROM chips himself might be a bit too risky. So Kevin had to get another friend involved. After telling his friend Alex Casper what was going on, Alex was ecstatic and apparently volunteered to do the deed for Kevin and collect the package in case there were any feds there. And Alex managed to collect the package with no issue, and it seems no one had caught on to Kevin's antics. Kevin would then get together with Lewis. Yes, Lewis, the guy that was now with Kevin's ex-wife, Bonnie, to test the chips out. We aren't too sure about the details of all of this in regards to Kevin and Lewis's friendship, but it seems that even after that whole issue, their friendship overcame it and they were talking again. I'm thinking, given past behaviour, I think Kevin is just a really forgiving person. But with the bitterness in the past, they tested the chips out on Kevin's phone, and they worked. Kevin had now found a way to subvert the feds. But for Kevin, that funny feeling of being watched wouldn't quite go away. Carrying on with more hacking antics with Lewis, he still wanted to see if he was being tapped or not. But before searching for any wiretaps, Kevin had met another hacker through his brother Adam, a man named Eric Hines. But his actual name was Justin Tanner Peterson. But he wasn't just any hacker. There was something off about him, and Kevin could tell. Even his brother Adam had actually warned Kevin that it was an ex-girlfriend of his that actually knew him, saying that she wasn't really that trustworthy. But something definitely was off about Eric. For being a hacker with no real job, he seemed pretty well off financially, and he would often go quiet about certain hacks. But he knew quite a lot about the community, and he apparently even hacked alongside another well-known hacker called Kevin Poulsen. Something seemed fishy. Eric also wouldn't give Kevin certain contact details. So hey, if Eric won't give the details over, Kevin would just get them himself. Kevin would soon collect various details on the so-called Eric. Addresses, phone numbers, etc., everything that he needed. Furthermore, that suspicion of being tapped became true. Kevin managed to figure out that even his dad's house had been tapped as well. Things were all starting to add up. Eric was with the feds. Maybe not as a fed himself, but merely a sniffer dog for the FBI to search for and bring other hackers down. This is a very common thing that the feds still do to this day. Catch a low-level fish and dangle some serious charges over them, but then tell them that all of these big bad charges will go away if they help them catch a bigger fish. There are way more details and stories covering how Kevin specifically figured this out, and along with all the other things that we've already covered. But Kevin and Lewis were very, very sure that Eric was with the feds. But what the FBI didn't expect was for their big fish to start fishing them. Just like in Predator, Kevin would cover himself in some tropical mud and start to chase the glowies from outer space, keeping one step ahead of them. This would start by Kevin tapping the FBI's phone lines, along with setting up an early warning system to enable Kevin to detect if there were any calls being sent out by the FBI numbers that he had managed to obtain in an earlier hack while he was tapping them. In late September of 1992, Kevin was going into work and he heard some faint alarms going off, getting louder the closer he got to his office. This was his Fed Alert alarm system, but thankfully no one else was in at the time. The scanner had picked up an FBI call going off in the area. This wasn't good at all, but at least Kevin had some warning. This is where things get hot for Kevin again, and not in a good way. He knew that the FBI were on his case, but they hadn't got him yet. Surely they would have arrested him by now, or at least raided his apartment. Or maybe they just didn't have a warrant yet. So it was now a case of, can Kevin get things cleaned up before the now expected visitors arrive? Well, he went back, cleaned everything up, dropping off various things that he had used in his hacking escapades at a friend's house and his dad's house before booking into a hotel to stay the night, since he was that scared of staying in his own apartment, which is understandable when you know the reputation of the FBI. This is probably one of the funnier scenarios when it comes to Kevin's story. You see, as we all know by now, Kevin loves a joke, especially practical jokes. The next day, after going to work, there had still been no sign of the feds. So, when driving home to his apartment, Kevin stopped by a donut shop, where he bought a large assortment of donuts, which he brought back to his apartment, and put them in the fridge, along with a note that said, FBI donuts. just a shitpost to fuck with the feds. And what do you know, the next morning the FBI did arrive and they searched Mitnick's apartment, just to find a box of funny donuts and a very smug Kevin Mitnick. They did bring with them a small cassette tape to play to Mitnick, and it was a recording of one of the calls he made to Pacific Bell while he was snooping around. This was obviously to let Mitnick know that they were watching him and they were just trying to intimidate him. Maybe it would make Kevin spill the beans, but nope, he wouldn't budge. Since they didn't actually find anything in his apartment, he wasn't under arrest, though they were very persistent in following him to his car, where they found some floppy disks that he left over. I guess that Kevin must have overlooked them while he was cleaning up. This carried on, and they ended up following Kevin to his dad's house, again trying to pressure him to cooperate with them. So Kevin was clean for now, and it would only be a matter of a few months until his probation for his antics with Lenny would expire. So the feds were, during that time, trying to find anything they could to arrest him for. We flash forward to December, and Kevin wants to spend some time with his mother and grandmother for Thanksgiving in Las Vegas. Of course, since he was still on probation, he had to ask for permission to do this, which was granted. But shortly after arriving, Kevin had this feeling again that something was a little bit off. So he went onto his ham radio to find out if there was a warrant on his head, like he had done many times before. Calling out using the usual call sign of some cops that were on lunch, he asked in cop walkie-talkie lingo, "Can you run a license plate for me?" And he gave his own license plate. They responded, "Are you clear 440?" But Kevin had no clue what 440 even meant. So, using a cloned mobile phone, he called another police station in the area posing as a DEA agent and asked what a 440 meant in Las Vegas so that it wouldn't seem suspicious. Turns out a 440 was a wanted person. All Kevin knew is that he wasn't going to take his chances with the law again, and he had to avoid them at all costs, which meant finally going on the run for real this time from the feds. Finally becoming a fugitive. Now, I'm going to be honest, we have covered so much of Kevin's story, and this would be one of the biggest parts of it, but just as a disclaimer, I won't be going into the full depth of what he got up to as a fugitive, because we would literally be here all day, so please keep that in mind. This video is already very, very long. First thing on the agenda was for Kevin to quite literally get the fuck out of there and find a new identity, which Kevin might have found fun considering he's a big fan of classic spy stories. And the name that he chose was Eric Weiss, which was the real name of Harry Houdini, which, if you remember, he was a massive influential figure in Kevin's childhood from the survival store. He's someone that Kevin had great respect for and learned a lot from. Once Kevin had sorted out his identity, he would soon have to find a place to live. And what better place to move to than Colorado? It was close to Las Vegas, where he would be travelling to and from, and Kevin thought it sounded good due to it being highly rated in Money magazine. Now, while in Colorado, Kevin would need to find a source of income. So he managed to get a job through the adverts in the local papers, but of course he would need to keep his head down during all of this. So he would jump between jobs, even becoming a fake private investigator at one point. Mostly so he could search for other identities to pass off as his own, but allegedly he did this to help a woman at the local registrar track down a relative, which only helped build his reputation as a legit private investigator because, I mean, let's face it, he had all the exact skills he needed for it. But while he was at the registrar, Kevin found the absolute holy grail. Several boxes of blank birth certificates. Throughout his time as a fugitive, which would last for around 3 years, Kevin spent his time hacking various top companies, including the likes of Motorola and Nokia. While doing this, things wouldn't be too hard for him, and his identity was working out well. But, of course, it wouldn't last forever, especially when his hacks started spilling out onto the news. Now, if you remember, Kevin had already managed to get custom burned chips from Novotel that he would use to masquerade his phones with various identification numbers. But technology changes, and he would still keep his old phone, but of course, having a newer and better phone wouldn't hurt. These would seem like complete relics to us now, but the MicroTac Ultralight by Motorola was one of a kind, or at least to Kevin it was. The only thing was, how would he do the same modification tricks to his new phone like the last one? Well, he would have to modify the code somehow. So, he'd already pinned down his next target. Motorola. This would start with his usual method, putting his feelers out to try to locate the engineering team behind the phone. Not the physical engineers, but the software engineers. Managing to be put through to a secretary at Motorola, Kevin would start off light by saying that he was looking for the project manager of the I'm going to keep going, it's a long video. Of the MicroTac Ultralight. A little pretext always helped as well. As usual, I'm sorry guys, this is the longest video I've ever done. I'm tired, my throat hurts. I'm just going to keep going. And those stupid students next door keep playing fucking music. And it's crap, it's like elevator music. I fucking hate students. I'm just going to keep going from where I was. As usual, the secretary was more than happy to put him through to them. Again, using more pretext of why he was calling, he would be transferred around departments until he was finally put through to the research and development department. Kevin was a little bit worried at this point because, of course, when you go further up the food chain, the employees usually get a bit more suspicious. But luckily for Kevin, they didn't. With the vice president of the department shrugging it off and saying, "Oh, the project manager? Oh yeah, that's Pam. She works for me. Would you like her number?" And as easy as that, Kevin now had a way to contact the exact person he was looking for. He called Pam, but no luck. Her voicemail said that she will be on vacation for the next 2 weeks. But if anyone needed any help in the meantime, they could contact Elisa, along with Elisa's number. Not all hope was lost yet, it seems. So, calling up Elisa, Kevin was able to fabricate a believable backstory of why he was calling, using all of the information he had gathered along his trip down the telephone lines. This time, posing as someone named Rick from the R&D department, Kevin said that Pam was supposed to send over the source code, but he wasn't sure if she had left for her vacation yet, which Elisa had informed him that she had in fact already left. Oh darn, if only someone could help me out with giving me this source code. Well, it turns out that Elisa was more than happy to help Kevin, asking him what version he would like. Issue was, Kevin had absolutely no idea what the current version was, so all he said was, "How about the latest and greatest?" Also, during this call, Kevin was outside the entire time while it was snowing and traffic was going past, trying his best to mask the noise of passing cars. He, of course, waited for Elisa to gather the files, but there was an issue. Elisa then mentioned how there were hundreds of files, which would make sense because it's the source code for a phone, but it wouldn't be easy to move them unless they were compressed down. So Kevin asked her, hey, do you know how to use tar and gzip, which is a toolset within Linux that can be used to compress the files, just like Kevin wanted them. And since he knew that they worked in a Linux environment, he knew that Elisa had access to these tools. Elisa said no, unfortunately, she doesn't know how to use those, but again, with that Mitnick charm, Kevin happily said, would you like to learn? And she enthusiastically wanted to, even saying that she loved learning new things. Ha ha ha, that's great, Elisa. Now come on and I'll help you fuck over your entire company. Yeah. Fuck me. Oh, poor girl. So for that moment, Kevin was her tutor, and she was his eager student, not realising she was about to compromise the source code of one of her company's top products. So Kevin walked her through how to compress the files, while still worrying about being caught out. Now that the files were compressed, he just needed Elisa to send them over to him, which Kevin didn't really plan on just yet. You see, the reason that Kevin was still outside doing this call is because he didn't think he was going to get up the ladder on the telephone line this fast. He didn't think he was going to get through to the Motorola dev team within just a few phone calls. So Kevin had to come up with something fast, but again he would have to walk Elisa through the process of sending him the files, which is where things got a little bit more tricky. So they tried to use the FTP protocol to transfer the file to somewhere where Kevin could get it later. But the issue was the connection kept timing out, which it shouldn't have. Then, all of a sudden, Elisa proceeded to say the one thing that Kevin didn't want to hear. She said that she thinks the FTP failing might be because of a security issue, and that she would have to speak to her security manager. At this point, you probably couldn't fit a cigarette paper between Kevin's arse cheeks. Kevin was already on the run, and getting caught trying to steal source code again was something that he just really couldn't afford right now. Elisa then came back, and of course Kevin was hesitant, worried that they might be recording the call now, only responding with ahas and so on. But Elisa then explained the IP that Kevin had asked her to send the file to was outside of the campus, so it wouldn't be able to go through, and they would need to use a special proxy server to send any files outside of their network. A campus IP is something that Kevin did not have access to. So it seemed like this was the end of the road for Kevin's Motorola hack. Until little Elisa responded with, but it's okay, I have the credentials for a proxy server we can use to send you the files. Oh, Lisa, she was keen. She was keen, wasn't she? I actually feel so bad for her. And she got fired. I'm certain she got fired after this. But once Kevin got back to his apartment, he managed to get one of the most confidential files held by Motorola at the time. It wouldn't even stop there, since Kevin would even follow up and call Elisa again at other dates to ask for other versions of the source code from her. This led to Kevin being able to compromise Motorola's network and gain access to an abundance of things via a strong backstory from all of the info he had already gathered, some more social engineering, along with some password cracking when, back in the day, password cracking was actually feasible. Things were going very well for Kevin so far, but what would make things worse is that he would end up hacking someone who would be instrumental in Kevin's downfall. Tsutomu Shimomura. Shimomura was a Japanese-American computer security expert that would follow Kevin throughout his last years before Kevin was finally caught by the FBI with Shimomura's help. But Shimomura would get most of the limelight because he would collaborate with a journalist named John Markoff to create a book called Takedown, detailing how they managed to catch Kevin, the dark side hacker. But the book itself was not received very well, apparently discussing Shimamura's eating habits more than anything else. So why was Shimamura going after Kevin? Well, people would argue that there are different reasons, but on the surface, it looks like it was an ego thing. Basically, Kevin had managed to hack into Shimamura's systems, gaining access to some emails, along with details on one of his reverse engineering projects. But that was just one hack. Kevin actually hacked Shimamura multiple times, managing to pull all of the files off of Shimamura's server. Finally, on February the 15th, 1995, Kevin was tracked down via radio direction gear to track down his cellular signal to locate his whereabouts in North Carolina. Basically, the same technology they used to catch Pablo Escobar. The police kicked down his door and he was arrested. It was over for Kevin, or at least it was for now. Kevin would be hit with a litany of charges, including 14 counts of wire fraud, 8 counts of unauthorised access to devices, interception of wire or electronic communications, unauthorised access to federal computers. The list goes on, and I'm just going to stop there or we will be here for a fucking while. Seriously, see how I says, there are now cybercrime laws? Well, basically, Kevin fucking get charged with every single one that get made. And, unlike his last court appearances, Kevin was, if you thought the 12 months before was bad, yeah, Kevin was absolutely fucked this time. Kevin was facing a maximum sentence of 460 years, which is it's just stupid when you think about it. But Kevin accepted a plea deal where if he confessed to some of the charges, he would only receive 46 months in prison plus 22 months for violating his earlier parole conditions. Kevin took the deal and he was released from prison in January of the year 2000. Just a wee funny side note, in 1997 during Mitnick's incarceration, Yahoo.com was hacked by hackers who were obviously big fans of Kevin. And the webpage was covered in porn, but it also displayed a message saying that anyone who had visited Yahoo.com now had a logic bomb worm hidden deep within their computer. And if Mitnick wasn't released, then the worms would be activated on Christmas Day and destroy computer systems all over the world. Turns out that there was no worm. This was just all a hoax, a prank, a ruse, if you will. But still pretty funny. Now, there's a lot to say about Kevin, and genuinely he seems like a great guy that has gone through a lot. Yes, he got up to a lot of mischief, but nothing really too malicious, using his talent, skills and ability to adapt to his advantage. The media would continue to smear his image, however, can fucking relate, with even Miramax Films releasing an absolute joke of a movie based on Kevin and his last events, and it goes without saying that the film is absolutely shit and completely inaccurate. Many movements also spawned from this, including the Free Kevin movement, which fought for Kevin to be released from prison. You would think that after all of the bad shit that has happened to him, that this would be the final downfall of Kevin Mitnick, when in reality it was a blessing in disguise. Using his fame as being the most wanted hacker in the world, who has now turned to the good side, is perfect marketing for new clients. Because who best to hire to protect your systems than the guy who could break into them in the first place? Kevin would go on to start his own cybersecurity company KnowBe4, along with attending various seminars and holding talks on cybersecurity, along with discussing his story as the ghost in the wires. Kevin is still a very much loved figure by cybersecurity experts and hackers alike. So now we come to the end of Mitnick's story, and this has been a very fucking long video. I think this is probably going to be the longest Mad Lad that we have made. And would you believe this is the condensed version? This is the condensed version, mate. Like, there was so much stuff we had to cut out. Like, so much stuff happened during the fugitive stage that by the time we got to it, we all just went, nah, fuck this. Fuck this. This is going on for far too long. But The entire story is brilliant and interesting, and I hope you've enjoyed the video so far, despite the massive length. But if you want to know more about the full story of Kevin Mitnick, then you can learn about it in his book, The Ghost in the Wires, which was the primary source for this video. The amazing thing about Kevin Mitnick is a lot of the earliest forms of hacks and methods were first done, at least successfully, by him. If a software company back then made a new security rule or created a new security check, many of which are still in use today, those rules and checks were first created to patch a hole that was walked through by Kevin. Kevin Mitnick definitely is one of the best hackers in the world, not purely based on his skill, but his personality and overall attitude as a bit of a shitposter. To this day, Kevin still works in the cybersecurity industry, but this time for the other side.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody subscribe!